recording. Okay, I just want to make sure that was.
Thank you.
I've done that enough in class where, and so I noticed the signs. But um, let me. I'll share my screen. I like to use PowerPoints or Google Slides to keep me on track. And so just a little bit about my background. That I got my PhD in media. Mass communication and journalism from CU Boulder. But my research deals with representation in the media. And I started looking more into representations of really neurodiversity more generally, but particularly autism spectrum conditions or disorders. Um, and um, and so, because it's part of my own experience that I guess growing up, I did find out later that I was diagnosed on the spectrum, but my parents, due to the stigma, did not pursue kind of support or accommodations or accessibility. And I was re-diagnosed when I guess it was about 5 years ago in my early 30s. And that was part of a longer journey into my own mental health and um, um, my own experiences. And so some of this is, I'm not in any way saying that I'm an expert in neurodivergent conditions, but kind of linking my experience, my therapy, and my own research, and the support of doctors and other experts, and using my background in media studies to start connecting this. And my earlier research looked at traditional media, and I'm starting to look more into social media as well, because that's creating spaces, as I'll talk about in a minute, where on the one hand, it does create community and it can increase understanding about the diversity of these experiences and the diversity of um, the way the conditions manifest themselves in people's lives. But as we know with social media, there is a large amount of misinformation and misunderstood information that can also be a lead people to not fully understand these conditions, and even be misinformed in terms of how people live their day-to-day lives, and what they need to be supported in living within this. And so for my own research, there's been a significant increase in shows that feature characters that either identify or show neurodiverse traits. And that latter portion, in terms of relating those traits, that there are a number of shows that explicitly say that character is on the spectrum, or dealing with other neurodivergent conditions like ADHD, which is again, for those of you who understand, there's a number of comorbidities, and within that, I have a number of those. I also I'm diagnosed with ADHD, anxiety, and I'll show kind of an umbrella within that. But often it's not just kind of one experience. That often with a lot of both physical and mental conditions, there's often different comorbidities that impact that life experience. My own general research looks at how media distribution and how traditional network and traditional corporatization of the media has impacted representation, and not all negative. That kind of the widening of the media space through streaming, through social media, and through other digital means has opened up spaces for more diverse voices. But those diverse voices, whether it's different physical or mental conditions, whether it's race, gender, sexuality, and other identities, they're often kind of overshadowed by more funded and kind of larger pop culture media franchises and media content. But within kind of this larger research, I've also noticed that many of these, especially because um, the experiences are, I don't want to say most noticeable, but most frequently, people come most frequently in contact with them in educational settings, along with the growing a number of diagnoses and support systems that have um, come out in education. That's often where, at least partially, if not fully, these representations are occurring. And then, as I talked about, I found comfort in media while growing up and relating to some of these characters. And then later in life, as social media has really inundated our life for better or worse, finding community within that, not just through social media platforms, but also community boards as well, and finding both digital communities and in-person communities through these means as well. Um, and just some general statistics, and again, because these conditions are not always diagnosed, and especially because of the cost of testing and the stigmas around it, these numbers need to be taken with a grain of salt, because we don't, it's one of those things, we don't know what we don't know yet, that we don't fully have the full picture because we don't have the full understanding of the lived experiences. And so about 17% of students who identify as being on the spectrum or having ASC go immediately to a four-year college. About 35% attempt college at some point, and 44% do receive some type of post-secondary education. And again, that the 35% number is four-year colleges, whereas the 44% does include two-year college two-year colleges along with vocational schools and other educational opportunities outside of four-year colleges. And then 20% graduate within 5 years. It's about 60 to 65%. The numbers that kept coming up was between 62 and 66%, depending on if it was nonprofit, or sorry, if it was private or public. But you can see that discrepancy in the numbers between those who are identified and are officially diagnosed to those who are not. And then just under 40% graduate within 7 years. And so even with a little bit extra time, those numbers are still lagging behind, but it does show that those with a little more support, those opportunities exist. But you get into the cost of college, having to have those extra years to complete it, and again, that's part of the conversation, whether higher education needs to be a little more flexible in terms of allowing students to earn their four-year degree, but with more flexibility in terms of that time frame. And then again, there's a number of comorbidities and a complex list of diagnoses within this umbrella. And again, these discrepancies I'll talk about in a minute in terms of not just in class and not just accommodation supports educationally, but social supports as well, which is a big issue, not only with those who identify as neurodivergent or identify with any of these conditions, but for non-white populations as well, and other underrepresented and marginalized populations in a college setting, that often the retention rates don't just relate to struggles educationally, they also relate to struggles socially that lead to seeking other opportunities. And so, and just some other in this graphic, and one of the issues, as I'll talk about in a second, is also that experience of being away from a support system, which again is not just in relation to ASC, but also in relation to a lot of a lot of people in general having to move away for college and not having that same at-home or community support system. But there's also issues in relation to employment, issues in terms of healthcare as well, that especially, and this is something I dealt with, that after I moved away for college, I didn't see a doctor for about 6 years, just because being separated from that, kind of having someone help me with appointments and go, and even remember to go to appointments, that there were times where I'd make an appointment and then forget. And so you also have issues of other mental health struggles as well in relation to depression and anxiety, and then also relationships, especially romantic relationships, can be a struggle, especially in the higher education environment, where socialization is more self-reliant, versus in high school, especially if those high schools have those support systems on a day-to-day basis. And just kind of this umbrella of the different conditions, but also realizing the strengths that come with this as well. And by providing the accessibility and support, you can also lean into those strengths that come with often being, and this is something that I've kind of leaned into, in terms of my not only hyper focus, but also ability to often write quickly, read quickly, and kind of synthesize information. But I do need some flexibility in terms of like deadlines and and other support in terms of meeting certain requirements, especially when it comes to social engagement in higher education. And some of the possible reasons, as I talked about previously, is that kind of readjustment period, and even kind of new experience having to socialize without that support system, especially if the school is further from home. And then change is a struggle as well for many people, including myself, in these conditions where it takes me a longer time than many people I know when there is a dramatic change. If I have to move, or there's a change in my schedule or routine, or other life issues as well. At the same time, I often am able to navigate some of the issues that other people take longer to deal with or navigate. And so again, it's just part of it is knowing myself, but also communicating what I'm dealing with and what I need from others, which is really a struggle, especially in the professional environment, because again, stigmas and not wanting to be seen as lesser or incapable because you need support that it hasn't been normalized in a professional or an educational environment. And then the need to self-advocate is often difficult, not just for those with these conditions, but in general. And then with that self-advocation, it's often focused in terms of accessibility and accommodations. It's around the learning experience, but that socialization, which is a key part of the college experience, is often not supported, and not having those spaces, and even little things that we don't realize that make it hard to socialize. For me, it's certain noises and navigating crowds and navigating spaces that I'm not used to, can make it a struggle to socialize in certain events or environments. And this is something that, again, with more awareness can be at least mitigated some, but it's that awareness that needs to be raised in these environments. And then it's a spectrum. That's the other difficult thing, that everyone experiences not only ASC, but a lot of these conditions differently and have different triggers and different experiences navigating them. And there's also not just kind of the reasons in terms of navigation, but also cost, needing consistent support, and even learning style, that we see these kind of hardline professors and TV shows and things like that. And that's something I dealt with as a college student, that I just needed certain understanding in terms of attendance and in terms of meeting deadlines, and even certain rooms being difficult to be in. And some professors just wouldn't give me that flexibility. There's more awareness, more support from various offices, but there are some professors, and I've heard this from students, that professors will refuse to accommodate, which again is a violation on a number of issues. Or even if it's not explicitly written out in the accommodation, professors sometimes struggle to be flexible with individual students. Along with, when you're dealing with lecture classes of 300, 400 students, it's hard to provide that individual support as well, which is also why it's important for teaching assistants and research assistants to also understand the need for support for individual students. And then you also have the the need, the fact that, going back to kind of my earlier point, we don't always know that students, again, because of the cost of testing. I know when I was tested later in life, it was about $2,500. And that was just to be tested for ASC, which it's actually a test that's meant for younger populations. But through not only the testing, but also my therapist interviewed family members who knew me growing up, and interviewed other people in my life to come at that diagnosis. And that was just for one. And I had to pay another, I think it was about $2,200 for the ADHD testing as well. And that was also to be able and eligible for medication in relation to that. And so that cost also makes it hard to access support as well. And I will, if students come to me and say, I had students come to me and say, I can't afford the testing, these are my symptoms, and I'm more than happy to accommodate that and talk them through it. But I know that's not the universal experience for those students who cannot afford, because many insurances won't cover that testing, especially as an adult. I know my insurance would not cover the testing, and it was, I mean, admittedly, it was very good insurance, and covered a lot of things, but just did not cover that testing to be able to move forward with the right type of therapy and support that I needed as a professional. And so popular culture is important because this is many people's first interaction or only interaction with people from a variety of groups. And so they might not otherwise engage or understand those experiences. And pop culture is in no way perfect or always accurate, but it is a space, and it's not just for different abilities, but also backgrounds, different ethnicities, races, sexuality, genders, et cetera, et cetera. And so pop culture can be a window to those experiences, if done responsibly, sensitively, and with the support of those who are experiencing it, or experts that understand the intricacies of those experiences. But because of the complexity of these experiences, it's difficult to really show the full spectrum of those experiences, especially dealing with and the more internal experiences or thoughts or struggles, but also um, the um, the fact that a lot of shows deal or kind of focus on exaggeration and stereotypes, because that's where the familiarity of the audience lies, and so it is often focused on a part of the condition or part of the experience that's most outside of kind of what we consider quote unquote normal. um, and again, kind of what is normal is determined by kind of a select few, or is very kind of a narrow experience or narrow viewpoint or perspective. And early representations are based not only on stereotypes and assumptions, but those extremes, as I'll talk about in a second, um, that within those you have that the I'll talk about in a second, those who might be nonverbal, or those who might be extreme in their struggles, and not kind of, again, the more subtle experiences that many people experience in navigating life, living with these conditions. And the other thing is that pop culture often lags behind the real world and kind of scientific research, and the actual experiences of those living the various backgrounds or various identities. And so conceivably, all of these conditions existed throughout human history, but it takes it being recognized often by medical science um, to start the evolution process and understanding these experiences. The first official diagnosis occurred in the 40s, and then you had a number of films that would kind of blanket consider it a disability, or blanket consider it a learning difficulty, with the often child exhibiting um, extreme symptoms in relation to that quote unquote disability. And then it often focused on inability to communicate, or what is considered quote unquote bad behavior, and might be even violent and temperamental, which again is part of the stigma that has been placed on the larger spectrum of ASC. Um, and then in the 70s, you start seeing more representations of children with various abilities and different abilities, but in relation to ASC and other conditions that are now under that neurodivergent umbrella, it was there were often struggle with communication, and were seen as even mute savages. There were some that were sometimes seen as savants as well, that they were, as I'll talk about in a second, films like Rain Man, where you have savants in particular areas but struggle with socialization, and other exaggerated issues for that individual. And I only say exaggerated because it's typically actors and actresses that do not actually live with those conditions, and as a result, they end up exaggerating the way that that condition is actually live, and it's the most extreme examples. And then in the 80s and 90s, for those of us who lived through those eras, we would get that very special episode where there would be a character that would show up for one episode, and then they would no longer be a part of the show. And so it would take until recently where there would be regular characters and even starring characters that would be identified as experiencing these conditions. And then often the storylines would be focused on the difficulties of the caretakers and not necessarily the experiences of those who have been diagnosed with those conditions. And then, sorry, oops. And then Rain Man kind of brought some of this to the forefront, as was in the last slide. Quincy did actually address it directly because Jack Klugman was part of a telethon, and he wanted to support ASC and wanted it represented in the medical show that he was starring in. And then in terms of Rayman, kind of the rigidity of his routine, the difficulty he had communicating, and it did not show kind of the spectrum of those living with ASC. It showed, again, a fairly, I don't want to say extreme example, but one that's a little more kind of outside or kind of the more experience that needed more support than others who might have more subtle symptoms or more subtle experiences, and might also, as I've experienced, have become more conditioned at masking. And then this kind of representation of savants would continue for another several decades in TV series and even as a plot device. I showed the poster from Bones earlier, and it's assumed that she was living with the condition kind of and almost kind of in that same savant experience, but it's merely implied and not kind of explicitly said in the series. And with Forrest Gump, he did display a number of characteristics often associated with people who identify as being on the spectrum or as neurodivergent. And he excels in situations where there are clear rules and guidelines, and would excel at certain activities. But in the film, he's diagnosed as quote unquote retarded and struggles to grasp kind of nuanced social cues or rules, struggles with romance, kind of with that whole storyline throughout with Jenny. And it becomes comic fodder, but it does kind of misrepresents, again, that spectrum of experiences, focusing on kind of this very unique life that he lives and the variety of experiences that are shown throughout kind of history. And his life being kind of a review of various historic events, but kind of his experiences are often comic fodder throughout the film. And then there is a fine line that we have seen increase of characters since 2000 with traits associated with ASC, but not explicitly kind of defined. And with Big Bang Theory, it's never said outright, although Jim Parsons in interviews outside of the show has said that Sheldon most likely experienced or was most likely on the spectrum, but it becomes, again, his difficulty socializing is throughout 12, 13 seasons of the show becomes really one of the centers of comedy throughout, and even kind of at the ear of those around him, struggling to understand the way he approaches socialization and approaches his day-to-day life. But more recently, these representations have become more nuanced and kind of better recognizing the individuality of these experiences. And then it rightfully so has received some criticism related to the character, but it does also show he excels in academic environment. Also is addressing young Sheldon as well. That he enters high school at the age of 9, is attending college, I believe at the age of 12 or 13. And so there is that level of showing his success, but again, kind of that's overshadowed by his struggles socializing. And then Atypical is one of the first series to show the transition from the high school environment into the college environment, looking at and also the possibilities, because there is an element at that college of supporting socialization, and in previous jobs, I've worked at institutions that had centers for neurodiversity that recognize not only that the the need for in-class support, but also the need for campus and socialization support. But unfortunately, as a school, and this is often the case because these centers are often open at smaller and even private schools, it was, as the school dealt with budgetary issues, it was one of the first things that was cut. Especially they've maintained the program for high school students, but eliminated the program associated with the college for college students. And so this is another issue as well in terms of funding, in terms of, especially over the last few years, budgetary concerns at a number of universities, especially smaller ones, where that smaller, kind of more more uh, contained environment can be one where many of these students can thrive, but also those smaller schools are the ones that often deal most heavily with those budgetary issues that lead to cuts in support systems and support staff. And so oops. And so there's also the complexity of adulthood, with many like myself being diagnosed later or recognizing more symptoms later as they navigate, and even kind of retroactively look back at experiences, and work through them in therapy, and even kind of internally. And considering the comorbidities, that there's also kind of that cross section as well, we see with a number of characters that might be dealing with other mental health or other issues of neurodivergence, and they can be kind of linked to a larger experience. At the same time, you're dealing with maybe a 2-hour film or hour episodes of a TV show. You can only show so much within that program or in that film, and but they can also be a reflection of real life as they navigate obstacles, not fully understanding their condition because of the cost, and because of not if you're not diagnosed or treated when you're younger, it's far less likely you're going to go look for that diagnosis later in life. But when done responsibly with producers, writers, directors with those lived experience, along with expert consultation, there can be a level of accuracy within those portrayals. And a couple of films, or one TV show, one film with Queen's Gambit, there is, even though it's not explicitly said, a number of experts viewing the show have said that her experience can be related to a possible diagnosis of ASC, but it also shows, as an orphan and someone who might not have that full family support, the lower likelihood that someone is going to be diagnosed with that in those. And it's been a while since I've seen the show, but again, kind of the way they kind of represent the way her mind works. There are some experts have come out and said that that most likely that she's not neurodivergent. And then Silver Lining Playbook is interesting because David O. Russell, part of his kind of viewpoint was his son was diagnosed as actually bipolar before later getting a diagnosis of being on the spectrum. And so this misdiagnosis as well is a larger issue, but he did use that experience and use kind of the issues navigating the mental health support system to inform the way he wrote and directed that film. And so you do see more people, because there's more diagnosis and more awareness, people bringing in those real life experiences to films to more accurately display a variety of conditions. And then some solutions for the future is increasing recognition of other types of accommodation beyond testing, like social environments, making social events more accessible, more comfortable, and even in the class, flexibility with attendance, testing, thinking of different ways to assess knowledge as well can go a long way in terms of retaining those students, because they're not. It's just not it's not just a benefit for the students. It's a benefit for the larger university to have them in the school. Can lead to positive results if you expand what it means to show knowledge and show understanding of different concepts within a course, and more communication between professionals and educators as well, especially with the permission of the student, and events like this, workshops, and other ways to provide that support, again, can go a long way, along with just more sensitivity for individual students from instructors and even classmates, and even finding ways to educate those who do not identify as neurodivergent to understand the experience of their peers that are navigating the social and academic environment in higher education. And then also beyond kind of neurodivergent students that might have social anxiety, other forms of mental health issues or illness, which may not require accommodations, can also go a long way as we rethink and evolve our understanding of what is education, and then also recognizing and supporting and even celebrating those strengths can encourage retention. And I realize I misspelled retention, but can again create that more comfortable environment to maintain those students within the school. And so I'll finish up there right about where I expected to, and just I'll stop sharing my screen and then open it up for questions. I'm just gonna help my dog real quick onto the couch. There you go, bud. Start with that.
All right. So for questions, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. If you prefer, you can also send messages to me privately, and I will share them anonymously. But yeah, David.
Thank you again for presenting today. I had a question about more modern programming with persons with disabilities. I know Atypical did a pretty good job of hiring actors who were guests on various shows or repeating additional characters who were actors that have disabilities in those positions rather than hiring neurotypical persons for those. I was curious if you're aware of any other shows or movies that have done a similar job of trying to make sure that they're employing actors with disabilities rather than actors who do not.
And I can't remember the name of the show. There was a freeform show, and I'm sure I could find it real quickly. And this was also significant because it was a young woman who identified as being autistic, and so this is another issue as well, that they're disproportionately, and this is also in terms of diagnoses as well, outside of media. There are diagnoses, or sorry, there are disproportionate representations of males who identify as neurodivergent. And so I'm sure I'll remember the show in a second, but it was also a freeform show that I think was canceled too early. And it was about a young man who has to, yeah, thank you. Rainier just said in the chat, everything's going to be okay. And the young actress was, but I think there's more awareness about that, about actors playing or getting actors who living those experiences, not just with different neurodivergent conditions, but race, gender, and things like that. I mean, the amount of white actors playing actors of color is still an issue in some media. But that's one example where they're being more open about or being more sensitive about including those actors, because it's not just about giving those actors an opportunity, but also the people living with those experiences know better than anyone in terms of how to portray it, versus getting someone outside of that and this is where some of the exaggeration can come in, where they're just trying so hard to show that they're kind of in a stereotypical way living those experiences. It goes over the top. And so that was one show where I thought she was an incredible actress, and it was disappointing when that show was canceled, because I thought not only did she do a great job, but she's a great comedic actress as well, and kind of adding a little bit of levity to what was kind of one of those comedic or dramatic comedies, I should say.
Thank you. Keith.
Yes, that's me. That's me, and I just wanted to say I really appreciate the presentation, as it gave me a lot to think about regarding my own experiences with testing and how I approached various courses in my college experience for various psychology classes, and whenever I had to get testing done, as I worked with disability services and my classes to hey, if I need an accommodating test environment, a space to do my own time, that I would take it. And I would say that I'm not sure about how other CU Boulder students who are on the autism spectrum did it, but I can imagine they were similar to mine, and I appreciate the feeling like sorry, word salad today on my end. I appreciate this presentation really touching into those aspects, as it made me feel like less alone or other compared to the other students, even though I do my best to put in as much effort as them when it comes to testing, homework assignments, and the like. Also, and also as someone who's working on who wants to write their own story based off of my own autistic experiences, my worldviews, and such, I want to contribute to more positive autistic representation in the future.
Good.
And also, are you going to be sharing the presentation so that I can review it on my own time?
I can, yes. I definitely, yeah, I don't know. I can work with Gavin and David in terms of making it access. You can also feel free to email me, and I'm happy to send it directly to you as well.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, Keith. I'm seeing, thank you. This was so interesting when you had the Bones poster up. I was initially thinking of Dr. Abby and had not even considered the character of Bones in the way you presented.
I appreciate that, Melissa. And I think too, again, kind of the fact that you have a female representing that I think is significant as well. But any kind of representation, especially in relation to her success, I think is an important one. And so I think yeah, just recognizing kind of that the different ways it can manifest itself in someone's life, I think is very important.
Awesome. And then Megan Flaherty says or asks, what is one of the primary lessons we as employees at CU can take from these stories of neurodivergent individuals to support our students here at CU?
So one is just patience. I see I mean not just professors and instructors, but also staff members sometimes be, and I'm lucky in the fact that students trust me to, because I'm open about it as well. And kind of what I need from students, that there are times when kind of I get sidetracked or I lose my place, or there just honestly some days where I just um, can't kind of navigate the classroom experience, and we'll find out an alternative way to navigate the lesson. But one is patience, two is just being sensitive and understanding that even if it's not something that's related to neurodivergence, everyone is experiencing something. You don't know what trauma, you don't know what mental health conditions, you don't know what just happened to them, if they had a fight or, with a friend or a family member, or someone in their lives passed or anything like that. And so I think just we need to be more human to each other. And I think that goes beyond neurodivergence. I think that's just in terms of navigating life, we've seen this level of instability and a lack of willingness to understand what people are going through. And so I think, yeah, I mean, kind of the short answer is patience and understanding, and just seeing the human in everyone and realizing that people have different experiences and interact in different ways, and just being willing to take a step back, take a breath, and then engage with that person, and not kind of judge them for what they're going through, or what you don't know and what is invisible. I think that's one of the biggest things, that a lot of these conditions are invisible, that we're not wearing t-shirts that say what our conditions are mentally. But it doesn't mean that doesn't impact every aspect of our lives.
Eva.
Sharing and being brave as a faculty member. I can really appreciate where you're coming from. I wanted to say that I think that the universal design talk is tomorrow, but anytime I hear what you say, I'm just more about universal design is good for everybody, right? And you don't have to be a neurodiverse student to benefit from alternative testing, in terms within class, alternative assessments of your knowledge and things like that. And so I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to make it to that talk, and I'm certainly not sure how we're gonna move forward after all of these conversations, but that's certainly one thing to always, I think, point out. And there was something else I was gonna say, but I can't remember what it is right now, but thank you so much.
Of course, and I agree. It's just, I mean, and I tell my students this, like, I don't care how you show your learning, and I don't care if that display occurs the exact time we have a paper due or a test due, if you're coming away with it, and I'm willing to spend that time, and if testing causes you that much anxiety, let's figure out a paper, let's figure out a presentation, let's just talk out. And I don't need to have this kind of formal test and exam or quiz. I just need to make sure that you're learning what you need to learn to move forward in your academic career. And that's why, admittedly, that's why like incompletes exist. Like if you need a little more time, especially in those final papers, that's fine. I don't need, like, it doesn't help my ego to make sure that that moment, and also this is why all my tests are open book and open note, that no one is going to jump out of the bushes and ask you, because I teach sports studies, like they're not going to jump out and ask you what year Jackie Robinson integrated baseball. That you're going to have your phone on you at all times, you're going to have your laptop, you're going to have, and so it's about being able to communicate what you're learning and analyze and show you're connecting these concepts. And I don't care how you do it. And every paper I assign and every test, I'm like, I'm happy to work with you and students. And this is where my biggest issue is the amount of students I have, that I wish I had more time individually to recognize a student's struggles, which is where kind of where that self-avocation, I understand, is tough, but say just communicate with me. Like I don't need even the students that are dealing with trauma or dealing with health issues with a loved one or themselves or things like that. I don't need every detail, but I can only do so much if you don't at least reach out and say, hey, like, can we meet? Can we talk? Or this is what I'm going. This is kind of, I'm dealing with family stuff. Can I get support? And so I know that self-avocation is not always possible, which is where some support, we always need more support staff. We always need more advocates and things like that. And so, but I'm always willing to listen and figure out other ways for them to be able to show and allow me different ways to assess they're getting the knowledge they need to move forward in their careers.
Fantastic. Thank you. Seeing a bunch of love in the chat for you, Jared. I think that I agree with what you're doing for open note, open book exams. Heck, I think it helps for neurotypical students who can also test how much information they're absorbing through notes and how effectively they can find that information. I can absolutely agree with that, Keith.
And at that point, it's about finding information in this day and age, that we don't need to memorize everything, and we need to, but we do need to be able to find information and communicate it. And so I appreciate that, Keith.
Yeah. Awesome.
You're welcome.
Yeah, this is fantastic. This is a really great conversation. If there are any other questions, let us know in the chat or raise your hands. Otherwise, I think that we can end it. I know that Jared, you're a faculty member here on campus, and so I assume if you just Google Jared Browsh, people can find your contact information. Is that okay? Great.
Oh yeah, please do. I actually don't. I teach remotely, and so I'm not physically on campus, but email. I'm happy to always meet over Zoom if people want to talk through any of this or have their own questions. And so yeah, please feel free to reach out.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Jared. This is a fantastic session, and I also, just to plug the rest of the symposium, I put the link to the website for the remaining sessions this afternoon and tomorrow. If you all found this interesting, please sign up for those. Otherwise, if we could again just give Jared some love in the chat, and that'd be awesome. Thank you guys so much. and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks. I appreciate the help, Gavin.
Yeah.
And you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Keith. I appreciate you
Bye.
coming in.
Okay. Bye.
Well, thank you guys. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thanks.